Recording in progress.
Good afternoon and welcome to the May 14th, 2025 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this virtual meeting format. For work sessions like this one, there is no opportunity for public comment, and those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling in to one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcasts and meetings materials page of the City of Eugene website. Thank you again for joining us. And I now call the May 14th, 2025 work session of the Eugene City Council to order. We'll turn it over to our city manager to introduce today's topic, a work session, council discussion of revenue options.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. We have been working like literally up until the last minute, which it won't seem like it because I just have some very rudimentary drawings for you or diagrams for you to help you walk through a discussion about maybe an alternative revenue source. Yesterday, you should have received an email that had an attachment that had a number of questions for you to answer. If you need me at some point to pull that up, I will. Initially, I want to just walk you through, a couple of slides to just help remind you and others kind of where we're at. I know that looks super complicated. So just as a regrounding, here we are, we're in the same budget process around 25, 27. And just as a reminder, the budget initially had the $8 million plus $2 million of new revenue, and the existing current budget already had $3.5 million worth of reductions. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is that the proposed budget, this is just a list straight out of the budget, the proposed budget already included a number of the things that you're hearing about at Budget Committee and at Council in an email. And so I just wanted to remind you that that was already, some of those things are in that 3.5. When that revenue became uncertain, your amended budget included additional proposals. And this is, again, these aren't all the items, but these are the items that were pretty much straight out of the budget book that includes a lot of the things that you're hearing about today. So when you're thinking about the amount, this is certainly a big piece of the discussion of what is it that you are hoping to restore even in a temporary way. I do also feel like I need to remind everybody that this current biennial budget builds off of what we did in the last biennium, which included over $35 million in reductions. Some of those are biennial numbers, so I don't want to, it's a little bit mixed up. So the 33 was over a biennium, the 2.5 is annual. I'm pulling numbers today, trying to help you. And those numbers, and the only reason I'm bringing them up is we made some pretty significant reductions in the library and to police, and some of the other services that you're hearing about today have also been cut in the last couple of years. And I'm unclear when people are talking about restoring, for example, library services, if they're including that or not. And I know we're talking about temporary, and we're talking about really focusing on the long term and getting you to a place where you can have that long-term conversation as a council and with the public. But that's, as you're considering things today, I just wanted to remind that. So today, yes, we're talking about, really I think the crux of the issue today is what is the number and what is the amount of time. I have to keep moving this thing around my screen. So there's a couple of things I wanted to keep in mind for that around the number and time, and then we'll kick it over to you to start talking about. The first is the number. So when we start thinking about collecting a fee, we know that there's going to be a cost to implement that. There's some one-time cost, which is that bottom box, and then there's going to be an annual cost. So regardless of whether we use a current billing partner or we bring in a new billing partner, we're going to have to pay for that one time to set it up and annually. And I predict it's going to be close to $1 million to set it up, and it's probably going to be $1 million or more to collect it annually. That would be in line with some of the numbers we've already seen. So that number is not going to change. It's not going to change whether you're generating $8 million or more, or whether you're generating 6 million or you're generating 5 million or 4 million or 3 million. But as that number goes down, the cost of money just is really high, especially if you're only doing it in a short amount of time. The other piece about time that I think is important is how we're going to bridge. So if you're trying to bridge to keeping some of these services whole, if it's an $8 million solution and we take what we've heard is 6 to 9 months and it feels like it could be longer, we could be in almost having to bridge that amount in one time out of reserves, which we don't have more than, I mean, this would be like really taking us to the brink. And if it's a lower revenue, like 6 million, we'll be just under that, trying to bridge that. So I just want to make sure that we're thinking about that. A couple things I want to say. I'm going to go back to here. There's a reason why there's a reason why we proposed an $8 million budget. And I'm not going to go on a giant soapbox for you, but I do want to say that when we've been carving away at services and making reductions over the last 6 years and longer, you've seen those graphs. There's certain things that we know we need to operate, and we know what kinds of demands we're getting from the community and what service and what the back end of that is in order to provide it. So there's a reason why that number came up. It's really hard to recommend anything other than that. I totally understand it is within your policy direction to do a different number than that and to make it smaller and to make it shorter term. I do have to say, if you start dropping below $6 million, it's gonna make a lot less sense to be putting in the cost. If you're doing less than $6 million and you're on a really short timeline, it's not gonna make a lot of sense. And so I would want to be able to talk through maybe some other different strategies with you if you decide to go that way. And with that, we're just gonna turn it over to you. If you want me to pull up the decision tree, I can. Otherwise, my recommendation would be to focus on kind of the amount you're looking for and the duration, because those are the key items we need more direction on at the moment. And I'll stop there. We have done some work. I guess I lied. We have done some work around like, what would it look like? When we hear the public talking about the things they want, we hear you talking about the things we want, how could that scale? If you want to walk through some of that, we can do that. We're prepared to do that, but we don't want to do it right at this time. We want to turn it back over to you. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, City Manager, for that update and information. Very helpful. Thank you for that presentation. I also say, just before opening the floor for council discussion, that while this is incredibly challenging work on a challenging timeline and with many competing goals or seemingly competing goals, one of the through lines that I've heard in this conversation is a commitment from community members all across Eugene to the importance of stability of our services. And there are a lot of other questions and concerns that people have, and a lot of hopes for how this body will continue to move this conversation forward. But I wanted to just begin by saying that I think that shared sense of commitment to the importance of essential stabilizing services in our community, especially at this time, is something that a lot of people share, even as we're struggling with some of these mechanics. So thank you, City Manager, for clarifying that this discussion around the amount to be collected and the duration is the next two pieces of this puzzle that we need to understand. I'll open the floor now for council discussion. Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say at the start of this that throughout this process, I think it's fairly easy to say that I've been the most dogmatic about, we don't have the money, let's make the cuts. And if we are considering any sort of new fee, let's send it right to the voters. I recognize the spot we're in and the outpouring of emails from so many people for weeks now. Makes it very clear to me that the wise person moves to compromise in a moment like this. And that's what I'm going to try to do. We're in a heck of a fix, and we're in a place where compromise is needed. And I hope all of us are willing to do some and find a place where we can agreeably meet to sustain the important services that our community relies on, that so many do. It brings up questions for me. I hope I got a minute 50. I hope enough time here. I may need the second round, Mayor, but the two principles that spring to mind as important for me are that we look at some of the input we've received from the chamber, from others that seem to indicate that we could look at a smaller number than 8. And I'm not going to say I know the right number off the top of my head. But as the manager mentioned, as we get closer to 5 to 8 or 5 to 6 million, I think that's a top end for me. And certainly the idea of limiting the amount of time to a year or two is an important principle, so that it gives us enough time to do the work as Council President has suggested, that we look at long-term revenue solutions rather than short-term ones. This gives us a bigger picture time window to bridge ourselves for a year or two. So I'm open to those options. Manager, you mentioned another way that we go here. That $1 million price tag on the collection of this stuff is a pretty big one. I believe I've heard mentioned the idea of stormwater as a potential choice as well. Could you speak to that at all?
Sorry, I was muted. Which is good because you just missed me saying, Yeah, I'll probably be better prepared to talk about that a little bit later, but I think, one of the concepts could be, is there a different way to do this with existing stormwater funds for a shorter amount of time? And it would be, if you're okay with it, I'd like to kind of hold on that until we get through a few people.
Sure.
But
And that's fine.
Yeah.
And I would actually be in favor of the idea of you coming back to us with that information. I just wanted to say that stormwater as a fee structure hits the business community disproportionately to the average resident. And so I recoil at that a little bit, but the services that we'd be extending would be predominantly for residents being saved by the business community, essentially, if you look at that narrative. So that's something we're going to need to take into consideration.
Well, I will speak to that because without going into details, part of when I talk about the cost of money, one of the biggest challenges we're going to have is how are we going to bill for this additional fee? And we've had I think some good ideas that have not been completely embraced. So when I look at what is it we actually have control of, the data we have control of is stormwater data. And so if we end up having to bill on our own, we're going to be using that data one way or the other. That's going to be the basis of I think that's going to have to be the basis of any new fee. And so I'm just trying to think through, that may be what we end up having to use regardless.
Thank you.
Councilor Evans.
Thanks, Mayor. I apologize for my video being kind of strange, but anyway, so City Manager, are we talking about incorporating the cost for administration of the fee into the fee, and or would that be separated out from the fee, or would we be talking about, in the case of the stormwater, incorporating that administration, the $1 million, or would that be a smaller amount if we went the stormwater route versus some of the other routes that we have to take in terms of administering the fee?
Yeah, so if we talked about this before when we were talking about other fees, but the cost of collection will be built in. So for example, if we think it's $1 million, and let's just use that number, if we're trying to generate $8 million, we actually have to bill for 9 to generate $8 million worth of service, right? You have to build that in, and we build in the cost of administration plus the cost of what we would want to put in the customer care account for low-income assistance. That was also built in. So the cost of the fee goes up because you're having to cover that administrative and billing costs. If you use an existing mechanism, such as the stormwater, we already built it. There's a way of doing it. I'm not saying there's zero cost, but it's not a new cost and a new infrastructure and a new implementation.
So if we went the stormwater route, do we have a number on what that cost would be? And then as we incorporate it in the overall fee, what's the top end would we be talking about?
I don't have that number completely in front of me, but I might just need to talk to Matt, who's sitting over there.
Well, yeah, and it appears, and to me, and I'll get off of this in a minute, but it appears to me that that's our path of least resistance as we talk about moving forward with a compromise proposal on a short-term basis. And it's something I think that while I don't think anybody is happy with, that I think that between the business community and the advocacy communities, I think it's something that people can wrap their heads around. So I'm just putting that out there because I think we need to understand that, it's not just $6 or $8 million, but $6 or $8 million plus the administrative cost for the fee, and that's encompassing all of that. So I want to make sure that as people are watching us have this conversation, that they're really clearly understanding that the fee plus the cost to administer the fee is going to be incorporated, in whatever proposal that we can come up with.
So I'll just say we would not be able to generate $6 to $8 million with stormwater. I mean, you'd be very limited because it's
okay.
Talk more about that later, but it would have to be a much smaller number. It could act as a bridge potentially.
Okay.
Councilor Krasinski.
Thank you. My primary goal with all of this is to help make sure that the services, the library, animal services, the pool, all of these things that our community values so much are able to be kept whole, are we able to continue providing these services to our community. We knew that this was coming. We, 2 years ago, tasked the city manager, you all directly, me indirectly on budget, with finding a long-term revenue option to help fill this gap. I hear people starting to say, oh, this is a short-term solution. This was a piece of a long-term solution, and we are turning it into a short-term solution. And I have a lot of concerns about that because I feel like putting a sunset on this, going with this sort of compromise proposal is not the best policy choice for our community in the long term. We're basically going to be exactly in this same place in X number of years, having this exact same conversation with, I'm going to guess, many of the same concerns from members of the community. And so this conversation as a whole is a challenge for me for that, because I do believe that saying we're going to move to a solution that doesn't actually solve the problem and say we're going to solve the problem a few years down the line isn't really a great solution. But with that said, I am not interested in anything that doesn't fully restore the services that are in that amended budget. I've heard that the chamber has some things that they think we could cut. I haven't seen that. We had a very vague comment. And so before we have any discussions of lower numbers, I would want to know what are the things that we would not be paying for if we moved for those lower numbers. And when we're talking about sunset dates, again, I do not think that putting a sunset in place is a reasonable policy choice. But 1, 2, 3 years, like that is not enough time to reasonably move these conversations forward. 10 years, again, not opposed to not thinking a sunset is the right policy choice, but as far out as it can still be called a sunset. Thanks.
Councilor Groves.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Sarah, for the short presentation and getting us aligned for how we're going to discuss this. I am interested in a compromise. I was one of the 3 councilors that voted to put this to a vote of the public. And I do want to thank the public for commenting, but I also want to say to my colleagues, we're hearing from the side of the argument of the people who are losing services that are important to them. We're not hearing from the people who just don't want to pay more, which is, I think, a considerable part of our constituent base. And they aren't, because they think this is going to a vote where they have a chance to vote up or down on the issue. So all I'm trying to say with that is let's keep that piece in mind. I still long for prioritization process. I mean, that's part of the key of this thing working longer term when we talk about a short-term solution. We haven't done the hard work yet. And I think that that's necessary as we move forward, because the situation under the current way Oregon taxation works is not going to fix itself, and even adding a fee is not going to totally solve the problem. But we need to decide what level of services do we have to provide, do we need to provide, to promote a safe and reasonably healthy community. I don't want to see any of these services cut either. As I've said before, if this went to a vote, I would probably vote for the fee. But I think the public should have a right to vote for it. I do have a question for the city attorney. Can we legally use the stormwater fee for this purpose? What are the restrictions on stormwater charges?
Well, there's kind of 2 distinct things. There's the difference between raising an existing stormwater fee and using stormwater data as a basis and methodology for a new and distinct fee. So if you're asking about what we can use existing stormwater fees for, that's outlined in your code. You recently amended that about a year ago to include parks. And so that is in your code, and that there are boundaries on that. Using our stormwater data as a methodology and as a mechanism for establishing a new fee and charging a new fee, there are no code parameters on that.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I just wanted to make sure I understood that piece, and I think that's something that the public should understand as well if we go that route. Mayor, I may want to jump back in the queue down the road, but right now I think I've said what I wanted to say and asked the questions I wanted to ask, and I'll look forward to listening to the rest of my colleagues on this issue. Thank you.
Councilor Zelenka.
Yeah, Sarah, could you pull up that slide about the cuts that we've recently made?
Thank you.
Sure. We did have a solution to this, and then the chamber broke it. So we were on a path towards a a reasonably solid solution. But when people talk about cuts, we've already made, well, before this, we made $60 million, more than that, in cuts. And this is another some $3.5 million cuts. So we didn't put everything into the fire fee that we thought that of all the services to keep us whole. So we've already made $3.5 million with the cuts. So we've already got that under our belt. And this is that list of things. Those are gone.
It's a portion of that list, right? And then the next slide, this one is the rest that's in the amended budget.
That total $3.5 million.
Well, this is the 3.5.
Oh, plus.
Well, it's actually, but I mean, these are the items in the 3.5 that people were really, that are the ongoing items that were really service related. Then these are sort of the items that ended up being in the amended that you're hearing, I think, the most about from the community.
Right. Okay. So the $8 million continues services beyond these cuts, the ones that we felt that we needed, and anything that we collect less than that, even on a short-term basis, is really going to be a permanent cut to the budget. They're very likely not going to be restored. So I want to know what goes away if we lower that amount, and we can call that the chamber cut list, and see what that really looks like. I think the chamber really miscalculated in what they are in how much pushback and how much damage they did to themselves and their reputation. I think this is more a philosophical battle than a financial battle. That there are a section of them that just want to have government be smaller, and I'd love to see what their $250,000 campaign message is going to be. I think that's going to be a tough sell. So I'm not at all opposed to going to the ballot in November. I think that's going to be we may end up where we end up. As far as the mix of revenue sources, I mean, most things I work on that are complicated and end up having a mix of revenue sources. Unfortunately, eWeb isn't as good of a partner as we thought they were in helping us out here, partly because some of the commissioners are being roadblocks. But if the stormwater, say $4.5 million can get out of that, the rest of it has to come from someplace else. So that would be a mix. But if it's just that, that's huge cuts. That's a huge, gigantic cut to the budget. And I don't see how those the services that we think we should be continuing don't get cut. So I'm where Eliza is, and the $8 million is where I'm at. And nothing on that list is things I wanted to say.
Counselor, just we'll come back around for a second round. Counselor Yeh.
Thanks, Mayor. First, I just like to say, I think what Randy said about potentially not hearing from all sides right now is probably true. I think some folks are waiting to share their information, and I would be in favor if we have enough folks interested in putting out a compromise. I think sooner rather than later is where we're at right now, because I'd really personally like to put something out there that we think we can live with and makes sense to us as a council, and see how people feel about it sooner rather than later. I think waiting doesn't help anyone, in my opinion. So that's my preference. I wanted to ask Sarah just a little bit more about bridge funding and how it might work for you, assuming we stick with the $8 million amount. I didn't quite understand what you were saying.
Yeah. So if you stick with part of the, I feel like I'm being repetitive, so I apologize. But if you move forward with a new fee, alternative fee, and you're voting it into place, and we're bridging to that, right? We know there's certainty, you've done it, people are supporting it, whatever that compromise is. Then we have put together some one-time dollars that we can utilize to bridge those services until we're able to collect that revenue. And I can't remember, I don't know if Twyla's here. I can't remember what the exact number is. It's close to 8 million, 6 million. There's something in there for us to bridge to. If, my point is that if you're generating a temporary fee, right? So say it's a 2-year fee, you're going to spend several $1 million setting that up, and you're going to spend a very large chunk of savings to bridge until you can collect that for a year, right? So you're spending your savings too, and that was part of my concern. And spending your savings over a long term is less of an issue, but spending it and then turning around and having to do something else potentially and bridge again will be harder.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. 2 years doesn't make any sense to me at all. I realize, like Councillor Kaczynski said, saying that this is the solution is probably a little misleading. It's more of a Band-Aid to a solution, a hopeful solution, right? And I acknowledge that, you know, the long-term permanent fee that was option 1, I think you could call a solution. This is not so much of that. And I'm sure I can understand her frustration with that. What was I going to say? I just lost my train of thought. I will have to come back. Thank you.
Councillor Leach.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, City Manager. Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way that like what we had on the table was a good option, and now we have to make adjustments. There isn't a pathway forward, I think, without some adjustments. And so, yeah, I also agree 2 years is not an actual option. It's too much work, too much cost to set something new up, and then and not enough time for us to really do that hard level work. So I'm in favor of an alternative that has, 4 years minimum. I think I'm supportive of, a reduction in the amount of fee, but I think my main concern has always been to keep our services intact. And one of those services, which is in neither of our budgets, really is alternative response. And I know we're getting a presentation at Budget Committee tonight about alternative response, but the reality is that it's not in the budget. And to me, it is a very critical piece to our fire, to our police, to our response systems. It is cost effective, it's preventative, and we will see people's lives honestly at stake without, so I want to see us doing the work that would really analyze the gaps in what, the county has available, what our system, needs to function and thrive. There isn't anybody that can step in and do all of the welfare checks. There are gaps, and we know there are gaps. And I want our budget to reflect the importance of that system. But I know all of that is kind of up in the air, right? We don't have a direct place to put that contract. There's so much in motion, but I would like us to see, see that piece reflected in our values and in our system. And I know we'll get more information about that tonight. So, but the amount of the fee, I think I will be supportive of anything that will keep our core services and not, there's going to be vacancies. We can make some cuts. We can take out the positions that are already vacant. That's fine. But keeping those core pieces is where I'm going to be able to vote yes. And I also agree that it's taking this to public hearing as soon as possible so that we can get public input. Probably have another round after. Thank you.
Councilors, I'm going to move Councillor Keating up into the first round, and then we'll come to Councillor Kaczynski and Councillor Zelenka and Councillor Clark. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. I concur where Councilor Ye is and points articulated by Councilors Leach and Groves in particular about seeking a collaborative a collaborative. I'm sorry, Councilor Kaczynski, I hate to say solution, but a collaborative compromise that gets this in front of the public sooner rather than later. That results in support of a repeal of our fire fee, that seeks the alternative solution, that has a scaled down rebrand, that supports as proposed, a nominal new fee structure, whether that's the stormwater fee that's already built in or a similar funding mechanism that's built in that is reasonable, and that fundamentally saves our services or restores proposed cuts to animal services, to our contract with Green Hill, our library, our pools, our CSOs, et cetera. And I would like to also ask for an exploration of any or all one-time funds to help us bridge or build a one-time funding mechanism to get us as close to that $8 million as possible. What I am not into is just a quick fix that is revisited in just a biennium. I strongly feel that we need at least 4 years. I originally advocated for 10. I've heard in public comment from our business partners, 2. Let's find some middle ground there to get us time and circle back in circling back in a biennium. I fear doesn't buy us enough time. So I'd respectfully push back on the 2-year sunset as has been proposed, and I would support, as I've heard my colleagues say, at a bare minimum a 4 or 5 or hopefully even 6 years, but hopefully we can find some common ground. City Manager and Mayor, I do have a request, and whether that's today or it's at our next budget meeting or we have another work session, but I think it would be helpful for a very clear walkthrough potential cuts and add backs, as I'd like to explore openly what we can actually save and what we can actually restore.
So we have some slides. So, it's really your policy direction around what you want to add back or not. We've taken some steps to try to understand, like, what are we hearing and what are we thinking? So we do have some slides that would show, like, what if you were adding back the things we're hearing about, what that adds up to and what you can afford and what you can't, or what you would need to put in place. We have that available. And we can walk through that if the rest of the group would like to see that today.
That would be most welcome, City Manager.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to pull my screen up. I'm going to ask our Assistant City Manager, Matt Rodriguez, to walk through a couple of these. Hold on a second. I have to remember to share my screen first. That's good. It'll give him time to get on there. Okay, let me just pop through these really quick. Sorry. All right. Matt, you can just tell me how you want me to do this.
Sounds great. Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm going to walk through this in 2 pieces. The amount of reductions is fairly substantial. You can't get it all on one slide. So I'm going to talk about the proposed budget and then what we added with the amended budget. So what you see before you, similar to what Sarah showed in one of her earlier slides, is a number of the cuts that were in the proposed budget. It's not everything, so you're not going to be able to pencil out 3.5 million exactly, but these are the ones that probably show up most to the community. So I'm not going to go through all these, but go ahead and hit it, Sarah. The things so far, this is just, our notes as staff. You could have different priorities or different things you're hearing, but the 2 things that we heard the most about from the proposed budget was really downtown cleanup and beautification, and then alternative response transition. So that's the alternative response funding for a contract. And of course, right now we don't have a contract, but to have some funding there. Go ahead and hit it again. So if you take those two and you're only thinking about those two, and again, this is just one way to look at this, and again, an assumption, you might want to do something different. You looked at a different amount that you wanted to include for alternative response, since we haven't gotten to the point of fully analyzing the gap we're trying to fill. You could have a total of around, a little under 500,000 for that. If you wanted alternative response to go up, of course, that number goes up. So that would be the amount you're trying to fund to restore service out of the proposed budget reduction. Go ahead and hit the next slide. So then here are all the additional reductions that came in the amended version of the proposed budget. Again, lots of things on here. We're not going to walk through it all, but one that we heard a lot about was the animal services contract. This isn't the total amount of the contract, but it's the kind of differential over what's already included in the animal welfare unit of 200,000. Go ahead and hit it again. And then here are the others that we were hearing concern about. So the Office of Equity and Community Engagement, which includes neighborhood services, the alternative response position. So this is the position in ESF that's actually managing the alternative response contract and some of the other alternative response coordination that we do. The reduction in library hours, Amazon pool closure, Sheldon Community Center closure, the homeless services team, which is funded for the first year biennium, but not the second, the animal welfare unit, community engagement and volunteers and policing unit. And then we did hear also about parks engagement and stewardship and developed park maintenance. So if you pull that out, that's about 5.8 million. And we're using the second year of the biennium number for homeless services here, because if you're going to build a fee that's more than 2 years, if it's 4 years, you're going to need to have that about 620,000 built in ongoing. Next slide. So if you total that all together, and again, this is just one way to look at it, you get about 6.3 million a year that would be needed for a fee. That, of course, does not include any of the overhead administration costs. We build that into the rate model when we're putting it together. So, and I'm not saying that this is where you want to land. This is really just built on what we've been hearing and what we've been taking note of.
And I would say that, I said before that I think if you go down a short-term bridge strategy or a bridge strategy path of using stormwater, that number will have to come down. And we've explored that as well, but I won't go into that unless there's some desire to do that. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager and City Manager. Council, just a quick time check for us. It's 12:45 right now. For this next, I do want to, if we can, continue this discussion and also move forward with some additional information that will support our staff around duration and targets. So lots of questions on the table between a couple of different options here. So for this next round, I'd like us to move to just 1 minute and see if we can get through at least the 5-6 folks who are now in the queue with any questions there may be, and then see where we are on time with this meeting and how we want to either wrap up today or go down a different path. So Councilor Kaczynski.
Yes, very quickly. When we had the last presentation about this, there was a slide with very tiny print that showed the impact on the out years of different fees and different lengths of fees. And what I took from that slide is that a 6-year fee on the out years, because we do 6-year forecasting, looked the same as an ongoing fee, whereas a fee of less than that might have impacts on our credit rating or require additional cuts or additional things to make the out year balance. Was I interpreting that slide correctly?
Yeah, I mean, we show our 6-year forecast. So yeah, with the, adopt the fee that was already, that's the same as what was in the budget. It essentially shows us getting to our 3.9% or something in the out years, and we're shooting for 4. If you make it, every time you make it shorter, you're showing those either those reductions are showing up as being necessary, or we're tanking it into our UEFB and things you just couldn't really do. Yeah, you move your reserves into the negatives.
And then second, with the slides we just saw, I would caution that we're hearing from people who have heard about this. I noticed that one of the things that wasn't moved forward was communications. And so really, I didn't see anything on those slides that we should be saying, like, let's not keep this.
Councilor Zelenka.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with other councilors say your process doesn't work. Even maybe a 4 doesn't even work. 6 might, but I guess the question is we did that as a short-term bridge to what is the real question. I mean, the stormwater fee is an intriguing idea, but it's only like $4.5 million. So you'd have to use reserves to not cut the $8 million. So that's not, if you did that for very long, like you were just saying, that doesn't get you anywhere. So, and so I would like to see, you showed what gets restored, but I would like to see the counter of that, which is what gets cut. What are those cuts that what I call the chamber cuts? What can you show that list?
Well, so the list would be everything that didn't have a yellow highlight.
All right.
Right?
Can you put that back up?
Sure. So let's go back here.
Could you
All
illuminate?
right. So hold on a second. I'm like trying to move things around. So, okay. So oh God, sorry, y'all. So on this one, you would only be restoring a portion of the downtown cleanup. I'm sorry, you'd be restoring the downtown cleanup and a portion of the alternative response. Everything else on here is cut. On this one, come on. On this one, all of the yellow is restored, at least in part. And I have to do my math. Everything else is cut. That's under 6.3. If you want to use a stormwater methodology, we have a slide that could walk you through that if you want to see that.
This is bad enough.
Okay. You said you've had enough?
Yeah.
Okay. Enough of this slide too?
Leave that up for a sec.
Okay.
Thanks.
I can send you this too. Sorry.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to stop sharing it.
Thank you. Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I started this out by saying that this is a hard job and that I'm willing to talk about compromising. And so because I've said that, I want to say thank you to my colleagues, Matt and Lindsay and Jennifer, for being willing to join in that discussion and look at what another alternative may look like. Manager, I hope you'll be coming back to us, and I hope we'll have a motion to come back on the 21st with a further discussion of this. But I want to say that there is no long-term fix with a fee. It's unaffordable, and the community probably rejects it, in my opinion. That's not a long-term fix. The only long-term fix we have, because we spend more than the revenue coming in, is to look at how do we grow our local economy? How do we grow our local homes being built sufficient to have the tax base to afford the things we want and need as services? So that's the
Clark.
long-term work I hope we actually do someday soon.
Councillor Ye.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for showing that list a little more clearly. I appreciate it. I think there's some really important things on the cutting list, some of which I think is a lot more important than flower boxes downtown, but I'm sure that's a discussion we'll have later. I would just like to throw out something. I really think we should start with 8 million, 4-year sunset. I like the CPI increases because if we don't have increases, as costs go up every year, we're just going to be cutting every year again, which is not what we're telling people we're doing. We're telling people we are stabilizing our budget so that we can work on it in these years to find a solution. So I think if it doesn't if it doesn't go up with inflation or go up in some way, we're just going to be coming back and making cuts at every biennium. And that seems contrary to what we're trying to do right now. The Citizens Fiscal Stability Advisory Group, is that going to report to council or to staff in this proposal? I think I already asked this and I forgot.
We actually haven't made a proposal on that. There's pros and cons to both, and that's something you would have to determine.
Okay, but that would be where I would at least start, and I'd love to hear what other people think.
Thank you, Councillor Ye. Councillor Keating.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm still collecting my thoughts. If we could go to another colleague, I'll come back.
Just fine. Councillor Yeach.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Matt, for showing us, walking us through kind of what those reductions or kind of what could be saved. I really appreciate that. I think I'm really supportive of saving all of those pieces. In particular, the alternative response, like I mentioned, the community engagement teams, like all of those pieces in there are critical. I don't think 250,000 is enough. If we really want to fill those gaps, I think that's a really small contract and that it wouldn't be competitive to be able to like actually bring in someone that could be qualified to do that work. I would like to see that, probably double, and that would still put us well within the range of the $8 million. If we're saying about, $1 million of that would be administrative fee. So that would put us almost up to the 7 million. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Keating. You still on mute, Councillor Keating.
Thanks. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Since I just have a hot minute, I'm going to request what could be afforded with just the stormwater fee, and then let the rest fall into place as part of a larger conversation. There might be an opportunity to explore other one-time fees, et cetera. But if we just had an already built-in mechanism like stormwater, and we advance a reasonable nominal stormwater fee, what could be afforded with just that?
Sure. So we can walk through that. Let me just pull up a slide. Before I do that, I want to say a couple of things. There's some things, if you end up deciding, if the majority of the group ends up deciding you want to do a much smaller set of services to keep while you have this long-term discussion, and you choose to do that through the stormwater mechanism, part of what that does is it allows, you wouldn't need the bridge funding in order to do that. So it does free up some one-time dollars to either weather a change in our economic conditions, or to potentially have a larger number for what Councilor Leach was just talking about, at least in a one-time hold while you are waiting, or potentially making an investment in the per site account, which we've done in the past to bring down our long-term costs. So there's things you could do. So there's some there's some one-time things that I wouldn't recommend doing for more than one time. But with that, I will just pull up this. Hold on a minute. You know what? I pulled it up for me and not for you. That was really helpful. I'm helpful like that. Sorry, Mayor. I know we're on a.
We're doing okay. We're doing okay.
All right. So this is hold on a second. This could potentially be, the reason why we're putting this 4.7 number up here is because the way that the mechanism by which you do this is you use your existing stormwater code, which allows parks as a use, and you move the rest of the parks general fund into that, which helps stabilize the rest of the services while you have this conversation. You could do that in a temporary way by directing me to do that for this biennium or this biennium and the next biennium. And this is about what you could do in an ongoing way, so the list on the left, and I know Councilor Zink is going to see the cut list, and we can put that together too. The list on the left, you could afford, which would allow you to do some one-time things that are on the right, if that makes sense.
I can explain a couple nuances there, Sarah, if it's okay. So you're doing a combination of things here. So there's a little over 4 million of parks in the general fund. You would move parks out of the general fund into stormwater. And then the reason it gets up to 4.7 million is that any reductions that were also stormwater eligible could be added into stormwater. So those are the ones with asterisks. You see parks engagement and stewardship, developed park maintenance. That's the difference of how you get up to about 4.7. As Sarah said, because we have an existing mechanism, there's actually no additional cost to collect, except there's an additional percentage that goes towards the low-income assistance fund at eWeb. So it's very low cost, and you wouldn't have any one-time upfront costs with it. So if you wanted to have an increase that you really wanted to dial in how long you wanted to do it for, this is one where you really bring down those upfront costs of developing something to put in place. So again, as Sarah said, you can put about 4.7 million in the stormwater, and then on the right, and these are just things to consider because we're not using much of the bridge. We could do this in about 3 months, likely through right setting process. You could have some one-time investments in the biennium for some of the things that you're also concerned about. So it doesn't solve the big problem. This would really be something that you could use to stabilize a very base level of service until you have the larger conversation.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager. Councilor Groves.
Thank you, Mayor. What are the offsets with enhanced revenue or revenue coming in from some of the things we're restoring or proposing to restore?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, some of the things that were cut produce revenue. Now we're talking about restoring some of those things. Is that revenue calculation, is there somewhere where that revenue's been calculated?
The numbers that I can, if that's okay, sorry, I can do. So the numbers that you see are actually net.
Okay.
So like for Amazon Pool, it costs more than that amount to operate it, but there's an offset from revenue. So that is the net that you're actually seeing for those that are revenue producing.
Thank you. That's helpful. Mm-hmm. And the last thing I just wanted to say is I too appreciate the members of this body that are trying to figure out how we find compromise and how we get to yes, which is really what our community needs us to do. And I certainly don't appreciate some of the attacks on groups in our community that are also trying to get to a reasonable place here. And I don't think attacking the chamber or our business community is productive or beneficial to what we are trying to accomplish. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilor Evans.
Let me unmute myself. Thank you, Mayor. I think we're getting close to some type of compromise. I like what Matt has just put up on the screen. And I think that if we can get to a point where we can agree to a 4-year sunset, be efficient in our conversations about long-term budget stability solutions, looking at a $4.7 million stormwater fee and the $1.1 million one-time monies that could help us bridge it over, could be the compromise Band-Aid solution to where we want to go, and then being able to have these more broader, in-depth conversations over the period beginning after we come back from break in September.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Zelenka?
Yeah, seems like we're talking about this in a backwards way. It's not what we keep, it's what we lose. What are the cuts? And those cuts are likely permanent. So the question would be, are we willing to live without those things? And that's a reasonable conversation to have. So I think when we have a further conversation, I think this should be framed, here's what we lose if we go down this path. As opposed, because it's very complicated and unclear what actually is getting lost here. I totally agree that we could go down and look at long-term solution. I think that's going to be a math exercise that doesn't get you anywhere really fast, but we can look at that. And I think even a 4-year sunset doesn't really get you 4 years, because you start this process like 2 years down the road. You want to talk to that city manager, because it's not really 4 years. It's you start process of cutting late halfway.
Yeah, no, I shared that. I think if it's 4 years, you are building the cuts or the new revenue into the third next biennium. If you do it any sooner than that, you're cutting mid biennium. So it's just a matter of when you want to plan that. If you as I've said, I think less than 4 years is really problematic, because you're going to be struggling, but you'll be struggling to get through all the long-term conversations, get the buy-in, get enough community engagement to put something in place before you're actually having to make cuts on top of that and doing it at the same time.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I liked Greg's summary of the conversation. I don't know if it's appropriate, so I'm going to ask the question. Is it appropriate now to make that a motion for a furtherance of this discussion on the 21st, where the manager can come back with a sense of the majority's way forward on paper? So as Alan mentioned, we have more details to discuss. Can we do that? Is that an appropriate motion? If so,
I just want to say it's really hard for me I don't have a sense of the majority right at the moment.
Greg summarized it really well, I think.
And Councillor Clark, let's complete this round of feedback, and then I think looping back to the clarifications, and Council President Evans, you may want to also re-clarify depending on what you hear. We will be continuing this conversation, it sounds, at a work session coming soon.
Excellent.
But Councillor Leach.
Then, well, I wasn't quite
I'm
done.
so sorry.
It's all right. I was just wondering if it was appropriate to do that now, because of the fact that it sounded like we had at least a majority of councillors there in what they're willing to live with. And what Greg outlined was what I heard anyway as a majority point of view. So I'd like to move us forward and make sure that we're coming back on the 21st. That's a question, Manager.
I think we have a work session on the 21st.
We have a work session on the 21st, and we have space available in that work session if needed for this discussion, 45 minutes.
The question is, are we bringing you back a draft ordinance that has, so for example, Councilor Ye said $8 million, however many years, are we bringing that back or are we bringing back a different solution for the 21st?
My thought was that what Greg had suggested was the majority position, but that maybe I'm incorrect.
Let's complete this round, Councillor, and then I think we'll have clarity at least around that piece. Councillor Leach.
Thank you. This idea to take this to the stormwater, I mean, it's really intriguing. Basically, we're able to get up to 5.8, where another one of the proposals was more like 0.3. That's pretty darn close, and not having to spend another $1 million in administration, we'd be able to do that faster. It seems like actually a good pathway forward to me. City Manager, what are the negatives, if any, that come with doing it that way?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time? The negatives of which part?
Of putting this on the stormwater bill.
Yeah, well, I think there's different implications. So, you know, we put a lot of thought into who and how things were getting billed to make sure things were equitable across business and residential and all of that. So I think the only, you know, we haven't been talking about it, doing this. And so I think talking to people and helping them understand it and then understanding how it would impact residences and businesses would be important to understand. So that's the real downside, and that it's a lower amount. If I'm answering your question right.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping that we could get to the end of this meeting with a direction for you to bring an ordinance back so we could get to that public hearing. Is there enough time for us to come back with more information on the 21st and still hit those marks?
It will be very difficult to hit the mark on a public hearing for an ordinance if our city attorney is not bringing you at least a draft of an ordinance. We don't have the same timeline concerns if you end up going with a stormwater smaller solution. You don't have the same timeline constraints. You wouldn't be required to have a public hearing on that. And so you don't have a new ordinance. So it's a different concern. But if you're going to move forward with a new ordinance for a temporary fee, the city attorney is going to want to put a draft of that in front of you, even if you hate the numbers and you need to change them at the end, or not even move it forward at the end.
I would like to see us have a draft ordinance in front of us on the 21st, outlining maybe the 8 million with the new mechanism in a 4-year sunset, and then also be able to then have that other conversation around the stormwater fee with a little bit more information, if we could.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kaczynski.
Yes, I would like to request that we not make assumptions about what the majority of council is leaning towards, and that as we move this discussion forward, we do it through an actual motion and a vote. And from preference, I think it would be helpful to have that be split out to some degree, to not have it be here's a total package, but if we're talking about different amounts we're looking for, different sunsets people are talking about, that those be separate motions to provide that direction, as opposed to making an assumption that the majority is leaning one way or the other in this case. Thanks.
Councillor Zelenka.
Yeah, when we come back with the list of cuts, make sure that we also include the cuts that were made, the $3.5 million cuts. So those things are going to be gone permanently as well. How long would you be able to do that 5.8 million stormwater plus 1.1 million in one time? Is that a 2-year plan or a 4-year plan?
You could do the left-hand column, the 4.7, you could do for 4 years. The right-hand side, I would want to spend a little more time analyzing how long we could bridge that. But sorry.
So if we're looking at 8 million, the delta would come out of reserves. So the
If you're looking at
2.2 million. As a
I
bridge.
need to spend some time looking at that. If you're trying to restore the whole 8 and you're doing 4.7 with storm and you want to do the rest, I might be telling you can't. Like you could do it, you could do a portion of that one time, and then you're actually going to need to make those cuts because you don't have a way to ongoing pay for that.
Right. That's the problem, because then these things get permanently cut. I do think we're a little premature for motions without all this data and clearly understanding what gets cut. And I think maybe having staff prepare potential things for the 21st in terms of ordinances would be a good idea, as opposed to trying to do that right now on the fly and without full information about how all this works.
Thank you. I think we have Councillor Keating back. Thank you. And Councillor Evans, you're next in the queue. Councillor Evans, you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. So, and this may be a little premature, but I would like to make a motion to maybe get us moving forward in terms of giving staff direction of what we want to see brought back on the 21st. So, part one of this would be asking staff to bring back a draft ordinance comparing the $6 million and $8 million in terms of what would be placed back into the budget over a 4-year period. And that would be inclusive of the 4.7 million in stormwater fee and the 1.1 million in one-time monies, and then also looking at reductions in vacant positions on staff, because our partners over at Lane County are looking at pulling out positions on staff, and I think that we're going to have to do the same thing. And I'm not talking about
Councillor?
Yeah, I know. I run out of time.
Thank you. But because you're trying to assemble this motion, I also am going to ask, I think, for some clarification.
I'm trying to do it on the fly, Mayor.
Nope, you're doing great and very appreciated.
You have it written out.
It did sound to me, though, like a couple of different things combined into there that in terms of staff direction would be easier to study as separate buckets of separate options for this body to weigh in the next session. From what I've heard, and I'm quickly summarizing this, hoping that city attorney, city manager will jump in, that there is interest in understanding a 4-year duration at a $6 and $8 million amount that would be in a fee structure similar to previous ordinances passed. There's also interest in studying this stormwater path and what the assistant city manager outlined with the essentially 4.7 million in stormwater and 1.1 in one-time funds that would total the 5.8 net, but that's a different structure and a different path of implementation. It sounds to me like from your discussion today, those are the two big questions that the council has before them for more information, separate from previous decisions already made. And if there are no objections to that as a summary, I think that combination of information would actually be the most helpful to you all. And apologies, my speaker keeps falling off of my computer. That's that very loud sound you're hearing.
It would be helpful if those were done in disparate motions. So if there's a motion, if there's desire to have a discussion about an ordinance establishing a new fee That would be one motion. And if a majority wants that, we draft that, we bring it to you for the 21st separately. If there's also, or instead of, a desire to have a discussion about increasing the stormwater fee by 4.7 million, an additional 1.1 in one time, that would be its own motion. That would be helpful in us preparing. But Sarah.
And just to be clear, that is to bring back information. This does not direct me to do either one of these things.
Yeah.
And if it's an ordinance, so if it's a new fee, whatever we put in it and whatever you ultimately decide will go to a public hearing and you'll have a chance to change that. If it's the other, we'll just be talking about it and exploring information.
Yeah, and I think Catherine captured my intent.
Okay. Thank you.
Motion 1 and motion 2.
So I think it will be important to have somebody make those specific motions. And it looks like Councilor Clark may want to make one.
I've got one of them written out.
All right. I will now, well, let's see, we have Councilor Keating still in the queue, and then I want to move to this motion. Councilor Keating?
Thank you, Mayor. I was just going to ask if it's overly prescriptive to make these motions, if the conversation that's been captured and we're all longing for more information about an ordinance establishing a new fee. We all seem to be longing for more information about a stormwater increase of $4.7 million. Why are we gumming it up with a potential motion when we can just make it really clear to the city manager that these are informational pieces that we would like to explore?
Right. Well, to be fair, when you're really clear, you actually have a motion that directs me to do the work. And that way I don't go off and interpret it in my own way. That is the clearest, cleanest way to do it.
Okay. I hear that.
I also understand what you're saying. I mean, if the majority, if there's a lot of head nods like, hey, we want this and hey, we want that. I'm hearing you want to explore both options. I'm getting that. But it's, if somebody could make those motions, it does make it entirely clear.
Okay.
Clarifying question, City Manager and City Attorney, since one of those two directions for more information involves a draft ordinance that would capture much of this information and the other does not require a draft ordinance, would it be reasonable for one to be a request to assemble that draft ordinance, knowing that it may be adjusted in continued conversation, or to just bring back information for the draft ordinance?
It would need to be a draft. You would need to be directing us to, what would be coming back to you on the 21st, if we have any desire to stay on kind of the timeline that Sarah's already, is I'm going to need to draft an ordinance. And you have motions around the separate piece around stormwater and bringing back information about stormwater is not in your AIS, but you actually have some motions in your AIS regarding us returning to you with a draft ordinance if you're seeking that clarity.
Thank you. Council President, if you are then willing, or Councilor, Council President, please go forward if you have it.
I'll defer to Councilor Clark to make the motion.
Thank you. Councilor Clark.
Thank you. And I only have this through Catherine's help because I asked. Move to direct the city manager to bring back information to the council May 21st work session regarding a stormwater fee increase that would generate 4.7 million revenue with a 1.1 million one time with a 4-year sunset.
Second.
Any discussion from council? Councilor Keating and then Councilor Zelenka.
Yeah, Mayor, I'd like the intent here. I just want to know if it is helpful to add the word possible or potential. Does the motion lock us into semantics? I get that, but does the motion lock us into this, or because we're asking for information, it doesn't need to be framed as a potential or possible? I guess I'm asking the city attorney.
It's just information, and I expect that a second motion will be made around the ordinance as well. So you'll be having that kind of larger discussion of both of these
Okay,
items.
great. Thanks. I'm supportive and will be in the affirmative. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilor Zelenka.
Yeah, my question was about whether or not there was going to be a second motion or not. And is there going to be? And what is that motion? Because that would potentially weigh in on how people vote on the first motion.
City Attorney, would you
Blanca, were you asking me?
Yes. Would you please restate when Councilor Evans said you captured his request regarding the 6 and 8 and 4 year, and there was something else in there?
Yeah, I mean, and Councilor Blanca, you could tweak these in any way that you best desire, but one of the motions that was in the EIS that could be used to bring that ordinance forward would be moved to direct the city manager to prepare an ordinance consistent with the outline set forth in attachment A to this AIS, but with timelines of did I hear 4-year sunset? A 4-year sunset?
Yes.
4-year sunset, and with both 8 million and 6 million alternatives for fee generation. I think that's what
that would be the second motion.
That's a terrible motion. Can't you just make that simpler and say, bring back a potential ordinance for $6 and $8 million fee with a 4-year sunset that
When it comes to making it, we probably can, but
long-term looks and vacancy savings? Because I didn't understand what you said.
Well, I will say, yes, absolutely. You can make the motion however you best see fit.
Okay.
What
as long
I
as there's
know,
going to be a second motion.
what I know in writing an ordinance, then you'll just what I don't want to do is provide you an ordinance that makes a bunch of assumptions. And so what you'll see in an ordinance that comes back is going to be a purpose statement, is going to be, you know, some of these things that you're not giving a specific direction on. And if you're okay with us drafting that up and just seeing how we typically do that, then that's okay. I was trying to give you maximum control over what you saw on that ordinance.
Thank you, City Attorney. Councilor Leach.
Yeah, I think it's important to include what we see in attachment A in the AIS, because there are multiple pieces that we have not really discussed, like the fiscal stability advisory group, we touched on the fee increases, the methodology. I think it's important to give staff that ability to use that information in the attachment to create the ordinance. The pieces that we are, deciding on today are the sunset date and the amount. So I'm supportive of making that motion as is, as Catherine just stated it.
Motion 1 in the AIS that includes attachment A. Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Kaczynski. Go ahead.
Regarding the motion that's currently on the table regarding the bringing back the stormwater fee, there is a cost to sort of talking about things forever and putting too many options on the table. And given that this does not restore the services, all of the services that we're worried about, and does not bring in enough money to do that, I'm not interested in it. So that's kind of where I am with that one.
Councilor, seeing no additional.
I have an additional
question.
So to be clear, is that the stormwater fee plus the one-time monies to get to $8 million, which would include cuts to reserves, or is it just 5.8 million? So no cuts to reserves. So we'd have a big, huge cut list associated with that. Is that the motion, Greg?
It would include cuts to vacant positions in the budget.
Well, vacant positions doesn't get you all the way there.
No.
I know that, but I'm saying that would be part of the piece there. And that's something staff has to develop. That's a little bit above our pay grade in terms of that. I need I think we need to leave that to the city manager to develop that and bring it back to us on the 21st.
That information requested, Counselor?
Yes.
Yes.
Call for
Counselor Clark and then City Manager Madeira, did you want to respond or add anything more to that?
Yeah, bring back a cut list of vacant positions because the county's doing the cut list doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I understand where you're trying to go, but the positions that we're holding vacant right now are actually critical positions. We've put the ones in the budget that we think we can eliminate, and those are already going to be eliminated. But just grabbing up all the vacancies we have right now, including police and firefighters, it would be not a responsible approach. And so that's why I keep saying no to that. We can continue to bring back our responsible budget cuts that accompany a smaller revenue source. We can continue to do that, but a whole new strategy of just using vacancies, I really struggle with, even though
and Sarah, that that was just kind of my uninformed suggestion on that. But
okay,
where you bring in other strategies for cuts, I think would be important in terms of this next level of discussion on the 21st. Can we agree to that part?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I'm taking from this, Mayor, is, the ordinance piece, I think we need more like emotion. The second piece of like, hey, we want some more information on the stormwater fee, what that generates, what we could afford to do one time, and what would get cut. That's easy to put together.
And that motion's on the table.
That motion is seconded and on the table.
I just want to be clear that that's what we'd be bringing.
And Councillor Clark and Councillor Zelenka, unless additional comments related to this motion, but not the second motion that we have.
I was just going to remind that's on the table and that's what he's talking about, not what Alan's bringing up.
Yeah, you don't know what I'm bringing up, but what is it that's on the table?
The motion on the table is to bring back
specifically
21st information about the stormwater fee that would be related to the 4.7 million and the 1.1 in one-time funding, which is to bring back information about a new idea that was introduced in this discussion today. So It's not an ordinance, but information about a different path that would come back in 1 week's time.
And I assume as part of that information, that it would be what gets cut as well.
Yes, right. Councillor Zelenka, there'll be more information in that, but it's an information update as opposed to the draft ordinance, which is the next motion for discussion.
Mayor, I've called the question.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, all in favor of this motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Councillor Evans, are you voting in affirmative?
Yes, you can't 7. See my hand. My computer is acting weird, it's wonky, but there's 7 my hand now.
7 in favor and all opposed, and 1 opposed, and the motion passes with a vote of 7-1. Thank you, councillors. And now to the second motion, Council President, would you please, believe it's motion number 1 in our AIS that captures the discussion. Am I summarizing that correctly, City Attorney?
Move to direct the city manager to prepare an ordinance consistent with the outline set forth in attachment A to this AIS and schedule a public hearing or return to council on May 21st for further discussion.
So those were in the alternative, and what I heard you say all today was to return to council on May 21st for further discussion. Not
right. Yeah, May 21st further discussion. So do you need me to move the second one here? Number 2?
Those are in the alternative.
Got it. Okay.
But
I don't need to move anything.
Well, so I do hear the caveats that you had originally, and Councillor Evans, correct me if I'm misstating these, but the caveats that you want is the ordinance to have alternatives of either an $8 million or a $6 million revenue generation and have a sunset date of 4 years.
Yes.
Okay.
That is correct. So that's my motion.
Second for that motion.
Second.
Thank you, Councilor Leach. Council discussion, Councilor Clark. And then Councilor Zelenka, would you like to discuss this second motion?
Just clarifying, it's going to be brought back a 6 and an 8 scenario, and also the cut lists of what get cut in each of those scenarios, okay, including the 3.5 million. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Kaczynski?
Yes, so I will also be voting against this, not because I don't want the conversation to continue, but because I think a 4-year sunset is much too short. And I think that talking about a $6 million. So my concern is with the specifics of what is being asked to be brought back, as opposed to the idea of continuing to have a conversation.
Seeing no more council discussion, I will now take a vote for this. Oh, Councilor Keating. Last.
Thank you, Mayor. I concur that. Well, I just want to be really clear. I'll put it on the record. I'm going to concur with my colleague that 4 years is too short, but I don't want to let perfect be the enemy of the good. I wish it would say at least 4 years. But I don't want to hold it up, and I want to move forward with alternatives that make sense to fundamentally save or restore our services. So I'll be in the affirmative to bring back the information.
Calling the question.
Thank you. Now take a vote for this motion. Councilors all in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and all opposed? 1, and the motion passes with a vote of 7-1. Thank you, Councilor. You all stayed 90 seconds later than our meeting planned, but I didn't want to take 3 minutes to extend our meeting by 90 seconds. Thank you all very much for this discussion, and staff for the additional work that we will be, you all will be doing and that we will be discussing on May 21st. I now close the May 14th, 2025 City Council work session. We are adjourned.